I wake up, I'm in fucking Texas.
Can you fucking believe that?
I know. It's kind of awesome, right?
The last place I ever want to live is Texas.
But it's okay to visit
Or
for 4
Boulder.
or 5 days. Or Boulder.
Or Boulder.
Yeah.
I avoid both.
I love the fact that we get to do the show live.
Me too.
This is great. We have a crowd.
We do.
Yeah, they can't sing. That's the crowd. And we are we're doing Elders
We
Live.
have a laugh track back here.
He's Dewey Freeman. I'm Mark Sylvester. We're the Elder Council. And we usually just talk by ourselves until we have some questions. So I thought we'd do a little bit of that first before we took some questions. And for people that are, if David could manage the chat, that would be fantastic, and take questions from the audience and cue the audience. That'd be great. We're here in Austin at what's called the initiation, right? We've got 25 plus men here going through this process, right? And I thought it would be interesting for you and I as elders to kind of reflect on initiations we've been through
On our lives
that brought us here.
Okay.
And I thought I'll start.
That'd be great.
I thought a lot about this, and an initiation to me is a state change, a rapid state change from one life to a new life. It's a definition. And when I was 18, I got fired from my job cooking at a short order house. And I had a wife and her 2 kids, 5 and 7 years old. I wanted a ready-made family, so I got married into one. And I'd gotten fired. And I was tired of Los Angeles. So I said, fuck LA, I'm out of here. With no plan and very little money, probably $200. We went to the Bank of America, got the money, went to U-Haul, got a truck, pulled it up to the house, loaded everything from the house into the van, and started driving north out of Van Nuys, California, and made it to Santa Barbara that night and parked, and was working at 4 o'clock the next afternoon. And that was
kidding.
50 years ago last August.
Amazing.
So it was no plan, just I didn't either. I was too young, but I had a responsibility of kids, making money and feeding, but I had a skill. I knew how to cook and I could talk. So I was able to get a job.
So you've been cooking and talking ever since.
Pretty much. Pretty much. And so what was your first one?
My first one as an adult. I had just finished a degree at Akron University in 1970, mechanical engineering and physics. And Akron University and Kent State are 12 miles apart. And if you remember in 1970, there was tons of unrest, tons of civil rights issues, anti-war, anti-Vietnam War. And on May 4th, and I actually had a job offer at Rubbermaid in research and development. That's where I got my internship, 25 grand a year, 20 years old.
Wow.
And I was on the Kent, my sister and her boyfriend and my girlfriend, her husband now, interestingly enough, they're married. They got married. They've been together this whole time.
50 years. Yeah.
50 years.
Plus, yeah.
We were in Kent demonstrating against the war.
At Kent State on that day.
Well, actually, the few days before. And my girlfriend then, her name is Nancy, and I heard rumblings across the street in the morning on May 4th, 1970, walked across the street, and as we were walking up the hill for the ROTC building, which had been set on fire the day before, the National Guard opened fire on the crowd. And I was there in that crowd. I could not. It blew me out of my socks. I was completely dumbfounded. I didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. And a friend of mine, a few days later, asked me if I wanted to go down to Southwest Ohio and work at a camp where they were putting together an outward bound program.
Oh, and you had never done anything like that before?
No, I grew up in farm country, so
Yeah.
I'd not done that before. On my way down, I called Rubbermaid, told them I was not coming in. The person who was my boss said, well, we won't give you a recommendation as an engineer. And I said, well, I'm not going to be an engineer. So that was the main shift in my life that led to what I'm doing now.
Wow.
At that time, if I would have ever thought that I would be sitting here with you, doing anything like this, I would tell anybody who asked me that they were fucking nuts.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Exactly.
So my next one was probably, so that moving to Santa Barbara was 10 years of cooking, built 5 restaurants, ran off-campus food service, did all of that stuff, really learned how to be a chef on the job, and raised my family, had a son, and did all that, burned through a couple of wives through that process. That's a different show.
That's a different show. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, that's a different show. But what happened when I was 30, I was very interested in art. I've always been interested in art. I looked at food as art and creating something from nothing as art. And I took a weekend class through the university called Computer Graphics, Art Technology of the Future. And so that the title appealed to me on a lot of different levels. Class was in Los Angeles, and the guys who spoke were the guys who did the movie Tron.
No kidding.
And that was my favorite movie. And it was the first use of computers in movies. And I was just enthralled. I wanted to hear. I mean, I have chills even now thinking about that. And I was cooking for the Jesuits at the time. I was their chef. And I came back on Sunday, and because we actually, after the morning speaker presentation, we got to sit on a Hewlett-Packard computer in the afternoon. And it was the first time where I could draw and see on the computer exactly what I was drawing. I had an Atari.
What year was it?
That would have been 1984.
Whoa.
Well, it's 83 and then 84. And then I was so blown away and taken in that 8 hours. I came back and Father Minister asked me how my day off was. And I said, my life changed. I know what I want to do. I want to make pictures with computers. He says, great. How are you going to do that? I said, I have no idea. And he goes, well, we have some time. Let's sit down. And we got the whiteboard, and he said, well, what do you think you should do first? And we just went through, okay, I should probably do this, and I could do this. I could call the guys who organized the course. I could call the Hewlett-Packard. I could do all these things. And I started to do that. And 6 months later, gave notice to the Jesuits, said, I'm out of here, and went and worked I'd never worked in an office, never worked on computers, I've never done any of that. So it was another one of those phase shifts where I go from cooking to computers, knowing nothing about computers. Fast forward 20 years, won 3 Academy Awards for scientific and technical achievement, won an Oscar for our software, and did, change the world in terms of how movies are made and how games are played, how cars are designed, how products are designed, and kind of got to be at the front of all of that. And now all this time later, I am now just going back to that world as a pioneer. So it's kind of fun to go back and get that recognition, which I never really looked like I felt like that. Mm-hmm. But that was a big shift to go to where it was just like, I have an idea to do something, or I listen to someone, I go to Disney and work with them. And they said, we really would like to be able to do this. Oh, wow. That sounds pretty awesome. Let's figure out how to do that. Come back to Santa Barbara, meet with the engineers. Okay, this is what they want to do. So I became this translator between one voice
One group and
another group. And it was like a perfect job for me. I loved it. It was kind of like listening to what someone wants to eat and translating that, right?
Translating it into something that's like,
I want some bacon, maybe lettuce and tomatoes. Hey, BLT, right? As I'm translating.
Got it.
So what was the next big one?
Pretty amazing.
Well, it was at 30 too, right? It was, I sit and I look at 30-year-olds now and I'm like,
You can say that loud.
yeah, I'm an ageist. I'm sorry. I'm working on that. I'm working on that. In fact, earlier this week when we had those stuff you work on, that was
one of them.
That was well, judging, right?
Got it.
Right. Because I was pretty smart as an 18-year-old and as a 30-year-old. So I'm guessing the other 30-year-olds are smart as well. So where was that midlife? Was there a midlife inflection?
Well, after I started working, it was a camp in Southwest Ohio called Camp Joy down near Wilmington. Met a woman there, and we came out to Colorado to backpack.
Oh.
I really thought I knew my shit. So we went up to about 10,400 feet. It was September.
Yeah.
And some dude came by and said, it's supposed to snow tonight. I look up at the sky going, it's blue. It's not going to snow. I had a pup tent with no fly. It was some little nylon tent. And I had sleeping bags made out of flannel with ducks on the inside of it.
Sears Roebuck?
I think it was from Pennies.
Okay.
And we went to bed and got up this morning. In the morning was 6 inches of snow. Our tent had collapsed on us. We had a Volkswagen Bug, which, if you know those, they don't have
four of them.
in them.
Had 4 of them. Yeah.
And we were freezing, and it was so fucking wonderful. We decided to stay.
So that was around the same time, right?
Yeah.
So 50 years ago.
It was late 1970.
Yeah.
So almost 53 years ago.
Yeah.
I looked for work. I did a bunch of odd jobs. I drove truck. I was a carpenter. I did all of those kind of things. And I decided to go back to school through the first class I took. I was connected with a group of, then they were called community centers. There was a state home and training school where adult people with disabilities, developmental disabilities, were being moved from the state home and training school into community homes called group homes. And the person I moved out with, her name was Linda. We were the first group home parents in Colorado.
And is there any irony at all that we are sitting
in a place that is run and supported by, I think, 92 young adults here who have some level of developmental disability.
Yeah.
From there, I decided probably I needed to learn some more stuff.
Right.
And I went back, got another bachelor's degree, and then later I went and got a double master's. And one of my master's is in special ed, the other one's in counseling.
And how old were you at you're 30, around 30 at this time?
I was, I did that pretty quick. It was 1975. So
then you hang a shingle out? Is that what you did?
No, I actually was hired out of my master's degree to be a therapist in a school for developmentally disabled.
Boom, just like that.
Just like that. And I was both a therapist and a teacher. And then 4 years later, I became principal of that school.
Oh. So you were a young leader. Your leadership showed up in your life pretty
Yeah,
soon.
actually, I was the youngest principal in
There
Colorado.
you go.
I was 27
Right, there you go.
years old.
Yeah.
So, so I guess it wasn't quite 4 years from 1970. It was late 1974. But and during that time, I also went back and did training in Gestalt therapy and bioenergetics and Reiki and body and breath work, which was another 6 years of schooling.
Talk about like you're a lifelong learner.
That would be true.
So, and you've gone and you've studied, but you've gone through traditional like education.
Some was traditional, some the training in Gestalt therapy and bioenergetics and body work and Reiki and body and breath work were non-traditional.
Right.
They were through institutes. The institute that I went to was after I graduated, I was asked to become a co-teacher there.
Hmm.
The woman who ran that institute moved out of town, her and her husband. And that institute closed. And then about a few months later, I restarted that institute. And that's a Gestalt Institute of the Rockies that I restarted. And I've been
To this day.
Mostly.
Most.
I actually later started another institute called the Gestalt Equine Institute of the Rockies.
So where did horses come into this?
Well, let me back up a little bit. While I was doing the Gestalt Institute of the Rockies, the primary, I was teaching, I had become a therapist, and the primary kind of work I was doing was wilderness therapy. So I would go out with groups of kids for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. I have about 1,000 hours of sleeping on the 1,000 days or nights of sleeping on the ground with kids.
Wow.
So close to 3 years total, probably a little less, but I went back one day and counted them up.
Hmm.
And was a clinical director of that program. That's what I grew into. And I was also very into horses. I'd started riding. I grew up around horses, but I didn't ride. And one day there was the beginning of some equine assisted therapy happening. And I actually went and did a couple weekend trainings, and it didn't fit. It wasn't relational enough for me.
Hmm.
So with a woman named Joan Rigger, we started a program called Speaking Horse. And three years later, that turned into the Gestalt Equine Institute of the Rockies. So there was a evolution. And that was trying to think. Speaking Horse started in 1999. We turned it into the Gestalt Equine Institute in the early 2000s. The other piece that happened in there was one of my, and if you remember, the Gestalt Institute of the Rockies was in the late 70s, early 80s. My former students was a professor at, and actually helped combine two schools, Naropa Institute, and it was called Boulder College. When those, and that was in 1989, when those two schools merged, I got a call from Deborah, who was my former student, and she asked me to come in and put together the Gestalt program and the program on teaching human development. And I'd been teaching for the University of Northern Colorado, traveling all over the state. And that's where I started putting together my attachment and developmental theory. And then I carried that into Naropa when those two schools combined. And I was at Naropa University for 31 years teaching. Wow.
So was there another big phase shift around 50 years old? Curious. 50, 55.
Well, let me back up. The other biggest shift, and it was actually in my early 40s,
Okay.
was, and I have had various relationships and a marriage that I was deeply in love and involved with. We tried to have children and were not able to, and had very, very late miscarriages. And then we tried to adopt. And the little girl that we adopted was born anecephalic, which no brain development. And we went through a whole process of working with her and her adopted mother, and her name is Sarah. And she died at 14 months.
That's a big,
That.
yeah. What changed after that for you?
Hang on. Virtually everything.
Yeah.
And my whole perspective of what life is changed. And I made a pact with myself to dedicate my life to helping people change and grow. And I had already been doing that, but my dedication to it and what I did with that was different. Yeah. And that happened. And that's when I started changing how I was doing therapy and how I was living and how and what I was teaching and how I was teaching it. It made me, what would the word be? Probably the best word. The word that comes to mind is almost warrior. Around because I just wasn't going to put up with any bullshit, is basically what it came down to.
And that's still, I mean, I know you, I work with you on a lot of different levels, and I know that is still very strong.
That's incredibly deep inside me.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of little points in there that wasn't exactly at 50, because it was in my late 30s and early 40s, all that was happening. And that shift is what I did carry over. And actually, but another interesting piece that was just a few years before I started working at Naropa, and that also shifted me.
Right.
Because that's where I became very dedicated to teaching on a very deep level and deepening my own work and diving into the kind of work that we're doing here now.
Right. And now we're at a phase where we're like codifying all of these things and getting it to where we build a legacy of all of this work.
Right, of all this
for
stuff
you,
that
right? All of these, like your revelations and new ways of thinking about things that profoundly, I mean, this week has been profound in the way that work is touching the men that are here.
I hope so.
It is. It's obvious to everyone. One last thing on me.
Yes.
And
please,
then
because one of the pieces I want people to get about you, and I asked you purposely to share about who you are, is because the work that you've done has actually changed our world and how we look at our world.
Yeah,
and how we communicate.
That's true. Me and a bunch of really smart people, but it was definitely the passion that I had for helping people communicate what's in their head.
You bet.
Right? Because when I went and moved in preparation for my TED talk, I really had to think what was my core idea, what was the thing that drives me. And it's something I ended up calling "See What You Think." And I wanted to help people who had product ideas or script ideas or character ideas or any kind of idea, that how would they get it out and then turn it into something which at the time was film, visual effects for film. How could we do that? Or games, or now it's virtual environments. And now Maya, which was the software that we won the Academy Award for, is like in version 20. And it's which is fantastic, because it was 3 years of birthing that, 3 years of me traveling around the world, talking about this big vision we had for what we could create.
Absolutely.
And that was 30 years ago.
Right.
And people were like, what you could do? I said, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And 3 years ago, I saw a video on YouTube created by NVIDIA. And it was those games where it was like a maze that you had with the marbles, called a labyrinth.
Yeah.
Okay. So imagine this whole room as an art studio that's built on a labyrinth. So now I have this whole art studio.
So we could have all these people rolling around.
Absolutely, 100%. And they took a steel ball, and then a guy's got a controller, and he's got his headset on, and he's moving the ball through the whole art studio, up and down ramps. There's millions of objects, and it looks like a photograph. And it's done in real time. And it's all the technical stuff around shadows and ray tracing and water and glass, all of that. And I looked at it and said, that's what we said we could do. And I called my buddy, who's one of the senior guys at NVIDIA. I said, you did it. Like, that's it. It's 500 million polygons rendered in real time. Oh my God. Like, I can't, kudos. Thank you. And he said, would you write that in an email that I could send to my team? I said, because it would mean a lot coming from you. And so I wrote an email and said that. They invited me to a lunch and learn with his team, the Omniverse team, which is the team that's saying, how do we put this massive compute power now out and start getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and get to Earth 2, get to digital humans, get to all these things that I want to see us get to. And did this lunch and learn, and it was great because they were asking questions, kind of like what we're going to get to in a minute. And this one guy, he says, Mr. Sylvester. And I said, oh shit, I'm not Mr. Sylvester. I'm not used to that. I'm not used to that.
Who is that?
And he says, I have to tell you that when I was 12, my dad bought me an SGI computer with Maya on it. And he said, if he'd not done that, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And to the idea of changing the world, I had this vision that if we were going to change the world, we needed to have people who knew how to use this software, how to create these virtual worlds. So I had to fight with my board to give away the software to schools. And at one point, I had 500,000 seats of Maya around the world, from middle school to design schools, art academies, universities, so that when they would be trained on the tools, when they would go to work at General Motors or Rubbermaid was a customer, they would say, hey, where's Maya? Oh, hey, Kelly's Wayfront, we need some Maya.
Incredible.
So doing all that, yes, but it was, we were at the very beginning when we couldn't make a smooth sphere. We had to make it out of a couple 100,000 polygons. It was all of that kind of stuff. And it's almost like the joke of, yeah, and I had to go 10 miles through the snow to get to school.
Both ways.
Yeah, with me, it's like when pixels were this big, It's like I feel pretty grandpa when I'm having those conversations, but I can still remember going to our annual graphics conference in the summer where everybody showed their new stuff at the Electronic Theater at night, and seeing mist for the first time, seeing moving shadows for the first time, seeing fire, seeing water, seeing cloth. And now a kid, he's 50, but a kid walked on the stage at Dolby Theater 2 Sundays ago and got the Academy Award for Avatar. And I was his first boss.
Right on.
Wow. That was just like, it was, so do we change? I think of it more of all the lives that were changed.
Well, and I think that's one of the cool things about our relationship and what we do is that both of us are trying to change the world and change people's lives in very different ways. And we both come in very different doors.
Yeah.
And we always find a way to connect.
Yeah.
And always find a way to support.
We do.
And always find a way to have a yes and grow from there.
Yeah, we do.